Hello and welcome back to Kidocracy at Large. I'm Siddhan Chandra, here every Saturday to look at current events and global conditions in the light of kidocracy, which declares the rule of minors and minorities. Kidocratic education is led by minors and minorities towards educating adults and the majority. Through movements such as BLM and Fridays for Future, minors and minorities are building solidarity among the 99% so that we can rule and regulate the 1%. So how will the 1% be ruled and regulated? One, through voting for people who can best represent the demands of the 99% through democratic elections. And two, holding the elected officials accountable to change the laws that stack the deck in favor of the 1%. We saw how Black Lives Matter, after George Floyd's death, galvanized people into action in such a way that it had a total impact on the US presidential elections. But a year since George Floyd's death, a law named after him, George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, is still being argued in Congress. It would ban chokeholds, restrict the use of deadly force, and make it easier to prosecute guilty members of the police force. But conservative lawmakers are resisting changing a legal shield called qualified immunity that protects police officers. Simply put, the 1% does not like its henchmen curbed. In the city of Los Angeles last year, during the height of the defund the police movement, the mayor promised to cut $150 million from the policing budget, but is currently increasing the budget and hiring new people. The justification is an increase in gun violence. Well, how about gun control? Then we are up against the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, which itself has a precedent in a British Bill of Rights dating back to 1689. So democratic action boils down to scaling back colonial laws going back centuries, questioning the wisdom of founding fathers, represented by rich old people in office, holding the fort for the 1%. And if law is set in stone and does not respond to democratic demands, it is as good as dead. Currently, children are suing their governments for subsidizing the fossil fuel industry in 20 countries, including the US, Canada, Mexico, Colombia, Uganda, India, and Pakistan. In the documentary Youth versus Government by Christi Cooper, we see 21 children from all over the US challenge the chokehold of big oil on the US government. In a case called Juliana versus the United States, we see these 21 kids from across the US facing floods and forest fires, uncertainty of their future, and bad health. Challenge a system that goes back to 1970s. The film tracks 50 years of governmental failure, in which both Republican and Democrat presidents supported the fossil fuel industry in the face of warnings by scientists. Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the roof of the White House, but in response to the oil crisis, promoted US oil industry. Reagan removed the solar panels and kept up the bad work, followed by Bush, who discredited scientists and bragged about the greenhouse effect being countered by the White House effect, and boldly stated that the government acts not as a master but as a partner and a servant of the oil industry. Clinton continued the subsidy programs, and George W. Bush, who followed, suppressed scientists' reports and censored environmentalists. And Obama put the solar panels back on the White House, full of environmental rhetoric, but in actuality, in his own words, we have added enough pipelines to encircle the earth and then some. Followed by Trump going completely nuts, calling climate change a hoax and destroying environmental protections even more. It is a map of 50 years of US governments willfully funding the current climate crisis. It is the biggest crime against humanity and a constitutional violation, according to the lawyer who represents the children in the case at hand, Juliana versus the United States. In the film, we see the children and their lawyers go through a legal process, a bureaucratic maze, in which both the representatives of the oil industry and the government fight them every inch of the way, blocking the case from going forward. All this going through something like more than 4 years. It is a grim battle in which we see judges practicing fence sitting and hair splitting. It's a battle so grim that the children finally have some support in a dissenting judge who quotes Dr. Martin Luther King. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. That is a perspective that can brace us. The law is alive only so long as our challenges to it keep it alive. School desegregation, gender equality, interracial marriage, and marriage equality were all won through landmark legal battles. Climate justice and police reform are next. While the case in the US is still pending, there is cheering news from Germany. Germany's top court ruled in a landmark ruling that the government's climate action legislation is insufficient because they lack emission reduction targets beyond 2030. The challenged provisions do violate the freedoms of the complainants, some of whom are still very young, the court said in a statement with reference to climate activists who had filed the complaint. The provisions irreversibly offload major emission reduction burdens onto periods after 2030, the ruling said. While most governments are committing to long-term targets, carbon emission reduction targets, they are slacking off on the short-term action. And this ruling focuses on that. So it is heartening to see Open quote. Following this ruling, the government has green-lighted the necessary legal challenges to speed up the country's bid for climate neutrality, aiming to hit the goal 5 years earlier in 2045. Cabinet approved a reform of the country's climate action law that also includes stepping up the 2030 target for emission cuts to 65 from 55%, tougher emission budgets in all sectors, and new reduction targets for the 2040s. It is good to see adults learning from children. In the film Youth versus Government, one of the plaintiffs challenges his climate denialist father with these words: "You believe climate has changed, but don't believe in climate change." And the parent replies, "Let's agree to have you teach me more." Exactly. Let the children teach the adults. Let the planet's 99% teach the richest 1%. Let the minorities teach the majority. That is how we will actualize the rule of minors and minorities. Till next week. Bye.